Babylon, past, present, and future.
We have traced the rise and fall of Babylon, from Nimrod to Belshazzar. Belshazzar was the last king of Babylon, but the city itself continued under the Persians. Then, a little over 200 years later, Alexander the Great, on his quest to conquer the world, defeated the Persians and captured Babylon. Alexander was bewitched by the idea of Babylon, the thought that the whole world could be unified under one civilization, one city, one man. But Alexander's dreams of world unity died with him in Babylon in 323 BC, in the very throne room of Nebuchadnezzar. In the years that followed, the city began its slow deterioration. By the time of Jesus, Babylon's palaces and temples had crumbled. Shifting sands had buried the parks and waterways. Even the Euphrates River had shifted course. A Roman emperor visited Babylon some 85 years after the death of Jesus and found nothing but mounds and stones and ruins. Today, the superpower of the ancient world lies desolate and forsaken. Its palaces, temples, parks, and gardens, its broad streets and boulevards are dust and rubble. Cracked bricks bearing the name of Nebuchadnezzar are strewn by the thousands across the site. Only a small section of the once great city has been restored as an archaeological park, and even that only in part. Most of the vast metropolis remains a desolate wasteland, no longer the thriving city of its glory days. It lies unoccupied, abandoned, and forsaken.
Babylon, the jewel of kingdoms, the glory of the Babylonians' pride, will be overthrown by God like Sodom and Gomorrah. She will never be inhabited or lived in through all generations.
The handwriting on the wall had marked the end of Babylon as a thriving city, but it was not the end of Babylon as an idea. Even Alexander the Great was seduced by its legacy. And when we get to the New Testament, we find that Babylon becomes more than merely a geographical location. Babylon symbolizes an ideology, an attitude, the epitome of a civilization organized in opposition to God.
I would describe Babylon as being a city that symbolizes in Scripture that which is the height of human power, and how it rules, conquers, and so on, all the way down through history. But ultimately, how its rulers were corrupt, and it kind of gets what it deserves in the course of human history because those who ruled it thought of themselves as little gods.
Here's the point. In all ages, the people of God have lived in the midst of a spiritual Babylon, a godless world. In such a world in pursuit of the physical, the material, the profit motive, little thought has been given to the spiritual realm, to the kingdom of God. This is, as we've seen, the Babylonian pattern. And in that sense, Babylon is with us now. When the New Testament wants to picture evil and defiance of God reaching ultimate fulfillment, it uses a phrase we can now well relate to, Babylon the Great. That phrase is found in the last book of the Bible, the mysterious Apocalypse, or Book of Revelation. The Book of Revelation is written around a remarkable vision from God, given to a man named John. His vision is often considered one of the most difficult parts of the Bible to understand. It's filled with strange images, sights, and sounds. And one of the most well-known are the mysterious 4 horsemen.
We generally call the Book of Revelation an example of apocalyptic literature. And by that we mean there is a kind of literature in the first century. It also exists prior to and after the first century, but it's common in the first century, which has certain features, and many of these can be found in the Book of Revelation. Some of them include visions. In other words, someone will have a vision and record what was seen, and the vision can either be a vision of what is going on in heaven or a vision of the future, or sometimes both. Sometimes there are journeys to heaven in this kind of literature. Someone is transported to heaven to see this. It's not simply a vision on earth, but there's actually a journey made. A couple of the other features that would be typical of apocalyptic literature include a lot of symbolism, and symbolism could be one of several kinds. There are, for example, many animals, both natural, a ram or some sort of sheep or goat, which will figure in this literature, as well as fantastic animals with, strange heads and wings and almost bizarre sorts of creatures. Colors are very important in the book of Revelation. There are white robes, there is red blood, there is gold, so that you get the sense of quite a visual. There's a very dramatic sense, but the colors are symbolic. Numbers are also important in apocalyptic literature. So symbolism is an important feature of apocalyptic literature.
It's really difficult to understand the book of Revelation if you do not have some kind of background in the various Old Testament books, because of the symbolism there is drawn right out of the Old Testament books. And the context, of course, in the book of Revelation from the time of the writer is future, for the most part. Some of it is historical, but some of it is future. And he uses the symbolism, very much so, to talk about the future of time and the future of people and what's going to happen.
Apocalyptic writers looked forward to the time when God would decisively intervene in history. John, in the book of Revelation, was living in a time of persecution. Christians were being killed by the Roman state.
The majority view is that Babylon the Great is a symbol, a name for the Roman Empire, and that if you think of this book as written sometime in the 1st century, almost anywhere Christians were living, they were living in a reality dominated by Rome, ruled by Rome, controlled by Rome, and therefore it's very natural that the world power would be symbolized with a symbol that comes from Israel's own past, namely Babylon the Great. In the Old Testament, Babylon is an actual country that carries off the people of Israel into captivity. And I think the author of the book of Revelation then reapplies that symbol as a warning to Christians to say that Rome today can offer the same kind of threat, maybe not a physical captivity, but can indeed be a real danger to the people of God. So there is a sort of recurring or timeless nature to that symbol.
The attitude of Babylon the Great is timeless and pervasive. It's an attitude of opposition to God and to the teachings of Jesus Christ. The attitude is insidious because wealth and prosperity look so good on the outside. This is why the references to Babylon the Great in chapters 17 and 18 of the book of Revelation have such meaning for us today.
I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. This title was written on her forehead: Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. Then the angel said to me, "The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth."
Here we have all the vivid imagery of apocalyptic writing. It's a future time. There's the woman, the beast, the vibrant colors and the symbolism of a harlot. The Bible has a lot to say about harlotry. God uses it to show how individuals and nations can be seduced from allegiance to Him.
In the Old Testament, harlotry is usually an imagery for idolatry. That is to say, the people commit harlotry. God's people commits harlotry when it is unfaithful to God, when it pursues idol worship. And now the church is faced with the same kind of threat, to abandon its true worship of God for other sorts of idols. Well, a harlot is an image of a seductress, someone who, as I said, is enticing them, alluring them to follow this way and to give up their loyalties to what they know to be the true God.
The Bible uses the symbol of harlotry in a couple of different ways. Harlotry is worshiping false gods. But as New Testament scholar George Eldon Ladd explains, harlotry also means the prostitution of everything for commercial gain. The metaphor of harlotry is also used by the prophets of the heathen nations. Tyre is a city who will play the harlot with all the kingdoms of the world upon the face of the earth. The idea here is not one of spiritual faithlessness, but of the prostitution of everything to commercial gain. Nineveh is also described as a harlot because of the way she enticed weaker nations by her display of power and splendor, only to scorn and enslave them. Ladd says of Revelation chapter 17, here the harlot is Babylon, the symbol of human civilization with all its pomp and circumstance organized in opposition to God, the city which has dominion over the kings of the earth. We've traced Babylon's appeal through the scriptures and through history, from the Tower of Babel to Nebuchadnezzar's city, and now to the book of Revelation, where Babylon the Great has reached immense power.
I think John is trying to paint Babylon as alluring and enticing. And one of the ways you would do that is to show how wealthy and prosperous and satisfying this reality is. And it can lull Christians into a false sense of security. So he's warning them by showing the seductiveness of this particular vision of the world.
In the book of Revelation, then, Babylon the Great becomes the code word for a monstrous anti-Christian world system, an economic colossus dedicated to accumulating power and wealth through world trade. This is Babylon's fatal attraction, commercial gain at any cost.
For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries.
Across the centuries, many have attempted to identify Babylon with specific nations, empires, or even churches. Every year, it seems, new candidates are nominated for the role of the symbolic figures in the book of Revelation. Babylon, the beast, the false prophet. But all interpretations have one thing in common. They've all been wrong.
The history of interpreting the book of Revelation is quite interesting because almost every generation of Christians that reads it feels we are the direct addressees of that book. Babylon is this entity or this church or this empire. Time and time again, people have predicted the end of events, and then they've had to change their minds, revise, redo. Maybe we read that wrong, maybe we read that wrong, and this refrain is repeated over and over, not just in the 20th century, but the whole history of reading and interpreting this book shows we've been wrong time and time again. Now that ought to tell us that it's very dangerous to jump to conclusions about and to be dogmatic about who is Babylon, when do these events happen. The when question is probably not the most important question in the book of Revelation anyway. That God will triumph. That God will triumph through Jesus Christ. These are the central affirmations of that book. But when it happens and who fits what picture strike me as almost leading us away from the central message of that book.
So the book of Revelation describes the final culmination of the spirit of ancient Babylon, an anti-God attitude that is present today, present through history, and will reach its climax at the end of the age. But no matter what happens, God's final triumph over all things is assured. Chapter 18 of the book of Revelation celebrates in advance God's final victory over Babylon the Great.
When the kings of the earth who committed adultery with her and shared her luxury see the smoke of her burning, they will weep and mourn over her. Terrified at her torment, they will stand far off and cry, "Woe, woe, O great city, O Babylon, city of power! In 1 hour your doom has come." The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. The merchants who sold these things and gained their wealth from her will stand far off, terrified at her torment. They will weep and mourn and cry out.